Ed Fitzgerald's campaign for governor enters a new phase.
You know that we're in need of real leadership, and we cannot afford to wait any longer.
This week, Richard Cordray was confirmed as director of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau, clearing the way for Fitzgerald to have an uncontested Democratic primary.
I think Columbus Democrats and other people across the state of Ohio are going to rally behind Fitzgerald.
Now that the path to the nomination is cleared, how does Ed Fitzgerald plan to unseat Governor John Kasich? We'll ask him coming up.
I think the lobbying came from the Jewish community.
Plus, the new Holocaust memorial at the State House was approved this week, but not before a mock-up from a key opponent made everyone shake their heads.
And
I'm Julie Chen. Want to check out this year's house guest for Big Brother?
Big Brother is the highest-rated show of the summer, but this season's not without controversy.
One of the contestants was born and raised in Central Ohio.
I became a professional stunt rollerblader when I was 18. I traveled around the world for 79 days.
From Ohio State's homecoming king to the Big Brother house, Nick Uhas talks about the politics of one of reality TV's biggest shows.
Plus, strategists Terry Casey and Sam Gresham weigh in on the top political headlines of the week. It's all next on Capitol Square.
Hi everybody, good morning. Welcome to Capitol Square. I'm Jim Heath.
And I'm Tracy Townsend. Boy, it was a big week for former Ohio Attorney General Richard Cordray. In Washington, Republican senators agreed to end their filibuster on his nomination. He was then confirmed as director of the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau by an overwhelming vote. Former state Democratic Party chairman David Leland says that's good news for Ohio.
This is huge for Ohio, and especially Central Ohio, because Rich is from Ohio, and it's great to have him in Washington in such an important position.
Now, if Cordray had not been confirmed, there was speculation that he might return to Ohio to run for governor. But the news this week leaves Cuyahoga County Executive Ed Fitzgerald as the lone Democratic challenger to Republican Governor John Kasich. And this could be an uphill battle for Fitzgerald, who has never sought statewide office. Check out this poll. This is from Quinnipiac last month. It shows the governor leading Fitzgerald 45 to 35%, but Fitzgerald insists that the race will tighten.
I've watched, and so have you, as Governor Kasich has taken us down the wrong road. The pay-to-play system in state government is as bad as it's ever been, with the governor's lobbyist friends making millions. The state budget is bigger than it's ever been. But we have been stuck with the bill.
We welcome now Democratic candidate for Ohio Governor Ed Fitzgerald. Mr. Fitzgerald, good to see you.
Good to be here.
Are you relieved? I mean, supposedly now the Democratic field is cleared. Rich Cordray confirmed this past week as the director of the Consumer Agency in Washington, so it's all yours.
Well, I was happy for him. You know, I've known Rich Cordray for 24 years, since, I hate to admit it, but that's when I was a student last at Ohio State. And so I was very happy for him. He and I have been friends for a long time. I think it's also good for the country to get him, you know, officially established in his office. So I thought that was a good thing. I think it's a good thing for myself and my campaign too, because it lets us focus even more on the differences between Governor Kasich and myself.
Well, let's pick it up there. What are
Sure.
the differences? Tell us why you want to be governor of the state.
Sure. Well, I don't think the state is heading in the right direction. I think the recent budget is a great example of that, because I think it's been extreme in a number of ways. First of all, it raises everybody's sales taxes. Everybody's property taxes in the long run are going to be going up. It's done some very extreme things when it comes to women's health care choices. And I've just run my operations as both a mayor and a county official much differently. We've been fiscally responsible, but we've also invested in things like public education, early childhood education in particular. And I think there's a better route for the state to go.
Is that the governor, or is it the legislature? Because a lot of what came out of the budget wasn't what John Kasich had proposed.
Well, he certainly,
the sales tax increases and what have you.
Well, he certainly celebrated it. So if he opposed it, he could have line item vetoed some of those portions, and that's one of the reasons why a few days before he signed it, I said, look, there are a lot of bad things in this budget, but there are some places where the governor really ought to draw a line and say this has gone beyond the pale, and he did not do that.
He did do that on Medicaid expansion, though. Are you standing side by side with him in that fight to get Medicaid expansion approved?
Well, I'd have a little bit of a different approach, because I don't think he's had a very bipartisan approach. If you talk to the Democrats in the legislature, a lot of them are still sitting by the phone waiting for him to call, because virtually all the Democrats have said publicly that they're for Medicaid expansion. A few of the Republicans have. There's a majority of the legislature that I think that would enact it, but I haven't seen the governor do what I think he could do, which is really hold people's feet to the fire and say, okay, let's have a special session of the legislature to get this done. Or let's do what the governor in Arizona did, where they said, I'm going to start vetoing things until this gets a real hearing. That hasn't happened yet.
A Republican with an even more conservative
Republican with a very conservative party there, yeah.
You mentioned earlier women's health issues. What is the likelihood, do you think, of a voter referendum on these anti-abortion bills? That
I think it's just too soon to say. As I said the other day, there's three options that people have if they're outraged by those actions. One is the election next year, and I don't discourage people from expressing themselves that way. There's also, I think, a very strong likelihood of litigation. I think you're going to see that in the next few weeks, either on the state level or the federal level, because there's a lot of constitutional questions that have been brought into play by some of that legislation. And then there is an option to take things to the ballot. I will say we set up a website to ask people if they're interested, and we've had about 3,000 people sign up and say that they want to actually have a ballot initiative. But that's not something that either me or my campaign can do unilaterally. There has to be a coalition, and those conversations have started. We'll have to see.
Okay, so there's $1 billion plus in the rainy day fund now. The governor points to that and says, look, we've turned this economy around. Would you leave it locked up in the vault, or would you return some of that rainy day money to local governments, as an example?
I think first of all, I'd go back to what my experience has been as both a mayor and a county official. I've always believed in having healthy surpluses and having a reserve fund, because that's what, first of all, it's just good fiscal management. So I don't disagree with having a strong rainy day fund. What I do disagree with is, how do you get there? If you get it by unbalancing local government's budgets, whether it's schools or local communities, which has led to layoffs of teachers and firefighters and police officers and sheriff's deputies all over the state, that to me does not make sense. You know, the state budget is bigger than it's ever been, and a lot of that has been at the expense of small local government, and I disagree with that.
Let's talk education.
Sure.
Funding. How would your education funding look if you are elected governor for the state?
Well, again, I'd look a little bit about what I've done in my county. We've returned more money to local schools, and we've had a special emphasis on early childhood education. Basically, every study shows that an early investment is what really pays dividends, and states across the country have really taken a leadership role on that. This state has not. Again, what the governor's approach was to really suck money out of local school districts. So there was originally over $1 billion, nearly $2 billion in cuts. They've replaced some of that money, but a lot of the money that has been put back into the system now has gone to some for-profit charter schools that have actually done quite poorly. I'm a believer in public education. I don't think that the recent budgets have really invested in it the way that we should.
Before you ask a question, Jim, also third grade reading guarantee, core curriculum, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think that that's a complicated discussion that's going on right now. I think that there's some benefit to that, to have common standards. I think that's a discussion that's still ongoing.
So how is the campaign going? I mean, you've never run statewide before. You haven't served in the legislature, in the People's House. Some might call it something else in Columbus.
It's been called worse. It's been called worse, right.
That legislative experience. You are from Cuyahoga County. How is this statewide endeavor going thus far? Traction?
Yeah, it's going well. I mean, we were saying before we started filming, there's a lot of interest in this race, and to be presumed to be the nominee 16 months before the election is a good place for any Democratic candidate or any challenger to be, really, and that's a little bit unique. Usually things don't sort out this soon, so we have a long time to have a discussion. Here's the other thing I always tell people, Jim, is a good campaign is really a two-way conversation. It's not just me saying, hey, I've got all the answers to every question that's going to come up or every problem that people face. It's a dialogue, and I am learning more about the state. And there are differences between different regions of the state, but there's a lot of things that people have in common. There's a lot of challenges that they have in common, and I'm learning about those as time goes on.
What do you think folks here in Central Ohio, Southern Ohio should know about you? I know folks in Cleveland are very familiar with you.
Yeah.
Tell us about your family, that sort of thing.
Sure. Well, I just turned 45 the other day, so I'm officially
old enough to run.
Not young anymore, right? That's right.
I don't know if I like that answer.
Sorry about that. Sorry about that. Sorry, but we got to face reality,
right.
Okay? Let's face it. I've been married for 21 years. I have 4 teenagers, which also ages me, by the way. I have 2 boys and 2 girls. My career track has been, I spent about 8 years in law enforcement. I was a county prosecutor, I was a special agent with the FBI, and then I've been involved in local government. And that's really where my passion came for running for governor, is to try to make government work. I was a city councilman for 9 years, I was a mayor, and I was a county official. And we've taken a large government operation, we've made it more efficient, and I think made it work for the people.
Mr. Fitzgerald, we're down to less than 30 seconds now. Very quickly, on the severance tax on big oil, we talked about that a few weeks ago. You want to be more definitive this morning? Would you favor an increase on big oil?
I'll be a little bit more definitive for you, is that I think that there should have been a formula that was done with the oil and gas companies to say, let's negotiate a rate, but let's try to tie it to local employment. One of the problems, and one of the areas where I think the governor has dropped the ball is, yes, this drilling is going on, that's great. He proposed a pretty sizable tax increase on it, which failed in the legislature. But what should have happened, in my opinion, is a rate should have been negotiated with the oil companies, where they said, okay, this is what the rate's going to be, but it's going to be tied to hiring local people. Too many of the jobs that have been created as a result of the oil and gas boom are going to out-of-state residents. They should have been Ohioans.
Republicans and Democrats watching your campaign finance report, I believe that's due in a couple weeks. Will your contributions, will you be over $1 million total?
Well, let's put it this way. The governor at that point in his election cycle, so a year and a half before the election in 2009, was at about $500,000. So that to me ought to be roughly what the barometer is going to be.
All right.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you for coming in.
Sure.
Thank you.
In Washington, the U.S. Senate has reached a deal to let college students dodge higher interest rates on their student loans. A bipartisan group of senators says they reached a compromise that lowers the rates for all students who borrow from the federal government. Congressman Steve Stivers, who's working on an extensive jobs bill, says the House has already acted on student loans.
I believe the Senate plan from quick reading today is going to be very similar to the House-passed plan. And of course, the president proposed something very similar as well. So I think we'll be able to wrap this up pretty quickly. I'm glad the Senate finally has an agreement. We'll see if they can pass something. They failed pretty much to enact any plan so far.
There was some controversy at the State House this week when this mock-up of the planned Holocaust memorial went up. The Capitol Square Advisory Board Chairman Richard Finan had state workers put it up. He says to help all the board members visualize the dimensions of the proposed memorial. The Jewish Federation of Columbus immediately requested that it be removed. Finan opposed that $2 million memorial, but the board voted to approve it, and it should be completed next May. And it looks like it's going to be beautiful. That mock-up, obviously controversial.
Yeah, really. Lots of folks talking about that.
Yeah. All right. One of the most popular shows of the summer, like it or not, Big Brother finds itself in a bit of controversy this summer.
That's true. Questions of racism have made national news. We are going to look at what it's like to be in the house and why politics has a lot to do with the game. We're going to ask former contestant Nick Uhas coming up.